What's up, JEFusion fans? This is Philip, and welcome back to another video. Now, previously, link in the description, by the way, I have talked about the references that Avatara Sentai Donbrothers took from the story of Momotaro, which is, of course, a popular Japanese folktale. But did you guys know that the story of Momotaro, and by extension, the story of Donbrothers, actually comes from an actual person? Yes, that's right. The story of Momotaro may have been inspired by real events. And that's what we're going to talk about in this video. So the story of Momotaro is actually inspired by the story of Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto. Now, the name Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto isn't actually a name, and before he was known by that, he was actually called something else. He was using a different title rather. But I couldn't memorize that. But definitely the name Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto had stuck in Japanese history. So, who is this Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto, and how important is he, or how did he affect the story of Momotaro? So, Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto actually is the son of Emperor Kore, the seventh emperor of Japan. Now, the only records that contain both of them are the Nihon no Shoki or Nihon Shoki and the Kojiki, which are basically historical chronicles of Japan. They're the only records that we have regarding Japan's more ancient past. So of course, things are gonna be quite embellished, so to say, because it actually starts with the Japanese creation myth. So during that time, so those emperors of ancient Japan, of course, including Emperor Kore and by extension his son Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto, are kind of semi mythical. However, by their records, so it appears that the Emperor Kore, and during his life, of course, so he had begotten sons, and of course, by extension, Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto. So, during his reign, Emperor Kore lived from 290 to 215 BC, making Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto about 2,000 years old. That's right, the story of Momotaro, aka Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto, dates back more than 2,000 years. We're talking BCs, my friends. Yes, that's right. Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto lived more than 2,000 years ago, which is very fascinating, considering, well, he is semi legendary, but it may be possible that there was such a person who lived during that time. So, what did Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto do that contributed so much to the story of Momotaro? So, Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto, like I've mentioned, is the son of Emperor Kore, so of course he is a prince. And he kind of governs the land of Kibi, or the kingdom of Kibi, which is now modern day Okayama Prefecture, which is why people of Okayama actually have, or they do claim to have, the strongest connection to the origins of the story of Momotaro. So we'll get to that later. So in the Nihon Shoki and Kojiki, so in the records depicting Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto, so he fought a bandit named Ura, who was most likely the inspiration for the Oni. And of course, Ura as a leader of the bandits, the bandits are, of course, depicted as Oni in the story of Momotaro. What is fascinating about Ura is, so the description that he was given is that he was about 20 feet tall, with fiery red hair. So he had fiery red hair and a beard that matches it. So he was depicted to be that kind of a monster. Again, given that it was written in ancient times, so things were, embellished to make it sound more, or to make Ura sound more ferocious and menacing and terrifying. Though he could be, bigger than your average Japanese person at that time, though not insanely tall. But nonetheless, he was depicted as a big, strong ogre, or an ogre like man, if you want to say it like that. So basically, uh, Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto went on a journey to defeat Ura. So, what is also interesting about the story of Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto, like in the modern day, so the island known as Onigashima is right now, if Okayama's geography is concerned, is now basically on dry land. However, in ancient times, that area might have been surrounded by a lake or may have been connected to the sea. But nonetheless, during that time, the island was surrounded by water. Therefore, it became an island. So, in the origins of Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto, there was no mention of a giant peach, but Okayama Prefecture is a place that kind of grows peaches, so I guess they kind of use that connection as well. And there are other aspects of the story that are fascinating, but anyway, so the time came for Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto to face the ogre known as Ura. So he enlisted help from other warriors from neighboring areas. This could be the inspiration for the companions that Momotaro had: the dog, the monkey, and the pheasant. Though, of course, uh, instead of animals, he had actual warriors, and by some accounts, he had actually a small militia prepared, not just a party of, four animals or three animals and Momotaro himself. So, another interesting aspect in Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto's story is that when he arrived at Onigashima, he saw an old fisherman. So, Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto asked the fisherman for information regarding Ura, and the old fisherman was kind enough to actually give Mikoto some dumplings, and these dumplings made out of millet were made, of course, in the land of Kibi, therefore giving rise to the name or the snack popularly known as kibidango, which is the type of millet dumplings Momotaro gave to his companions in order for them to join him. So, if you think about it, it wasn't the Momotaro that we know as Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto. So instead of uh, Momotaro, or in this case, Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto, handing out millet dumplings to his other companions, it was actually Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto who received the dumplings. So it's actually a nice twist there. So very interesting. So of course, uh, Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto and his men went to the island. Well, they were already there, so they planned their attack on Ura, and of course, they eventually fought. So one interesting story in there is that uh, Ura and Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto were basically miles away from each other. So, of course, at this point, Ura had already found out that he was going to be attacked. So, what Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto did was he fired an arrow. Again, they were miles away from each other, and Ura, being the beast of a man as he was described, instead took an arrow and threw it like a dart. Amazing. So, what happened was is that both of their arrows clashed mid-air. So, uh, where the arrows fell to the ground is actually now a town called Yagui, and Mikoto actually fired another arrow, eventually hitting Ura's left eye. So this is where another of the more absurd aspects of Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto's story comes. So, according to the legends, or historical records, if you could consider them as such, so there was so much blood that came out of Ura's left eye that it eventually became a river. Actually, it wasn't really that long, so that river of blood actually turned into a river which still exists today. And it is this river that became the basis for the river aspect in the beginning, or at the beginning of the story of Momotaro, which is the river where the old lady found the giant floating peach. And of course, inside that peach was Momotaro. So, upon being hit by the arrow, so of course, Ura had already planned to escape. And in order to escape, he transformed into a fish and diving straight into the river that basically came out of him. You know, his blood from his left eye turned into a river, and then he turns into a fish and then dives into that river. So, uh, actually, there was a bit of a chase sequence there. So, okay, so if you think Ura is insane, Mikoto is also just as insane. Well, in that aspect. So let me explain. So while Ura was running away, I forgot what animal he transformed into, but Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto transformed into a hawk to chase him down. You heard that right. Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto transformed into a hawk. Crazy, I know. But nonetheless, what happened next was that, so Ura transformed into a fish and went straight into the river that was basically made from his blood. And then when Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto caught up, he transformed into a different bird, which appears to be somewhat of a pelican or a stork, and then tried to gobble up the fleeing Ura. I kid you not, it was in the story. However, he did not actually eat Ura so that the Ura would die, so he basically caught the Ura in his mouth. So, of course, eventually they went back to dry land and turned back into humans. So, of course, at this point, Ura and his bandits were already defeated. So, it was decided that Ura would be executed, and during that time, he was beheaded. What is interesting about that, however, is that even after he was beheaded, Ura still continued to roar. How badass is that? Really? So, what happened was, because Ura's head wouldn't stop roaring, it was actually fed to dogs. And even when only his skull was left, it was still roaring. So what Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto did was he had the head placed in an urn. In some accounts, I think they had to boil the urn to cook the head, which kind of was pointless if you think about it. And then that urn was buried under a hill. Now, of course, that hill still exists today in Okayama. So Eventually the roaring stopped, I guess, but there are some accounts that you may probably hear some different roars depending on the situation. Like, uh, if like good things were going to happen or bad things were going to happen. Basically, the roars that Ura's head were still making were kind of omens for whatever happens. So again, his roars, depending on their tone, can either be a good or a bad omen. So yeah, uh, that's actually a really interesting uh, fact, I guess. So, but anyways, that's where a lot of Mikoto's story ends. No, I do know that there were more things that have happened, but basically, this battle between Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto and Ura became the inspirations for the story of Momotaro. So, uh, because Wikipedia isn't really your reliable source, although it does help, in some contexts. I have actually went onto YouTube and searched for a couple of videos, although they are in Japanese, but they did help me see more context. So the first video that I watched was actually that of a blogger going to those places where, again, most of the story of Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto had occurred. And not the second video that I've watched was an somewhat animated interpretation of that story of Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto. So again, they're both in Japanese, so um, I do apologize for that if you probably don't understand, but just in case you're interested in seeing them anyway, I'm going to link those sources down in the description. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video because I enjoyed my research going into this because you know it's fascinating how a Super Sentai that's airing right now, by extension, was inspired by, well, quote unquote, real events. Well, they could have been, but again, a lot of embellishments happened. But thinking that it may have been possible to think about it, so Avatar Sentai Donbrothers being inspired by Momotaro being inspired by Kibitsuhiko no Mikoto. So the story goes back 2,000 years, even more actually. So, it's a really fascinating thought. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making this. And if you did, please do leave a like, comment, share this video, subscribe, and don't forget that notification bell so you get the latest from JEFusion. This has been Philip, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.